Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've handed us a stack of sources, and they're all focused really intensely on just one short chapter, Genesis chapter 6.
That's right.
But our goal here isn't to approach this in the usual way, not as, say, traditional theology or just history. We're launching what feels more like a full-scale forensic investigation.
No.
Our mission today is to treat this chapter as a kind of rigorous blueprint. A blueprint for systemic failure, but also, and this is key, a manual for architectural rescue.
And that's the critical shift we have to make.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to move far beyond the familiar, the Sunday school story of a big boat and a lot of rain.
Right.
We're analyzing Genesis 6 as an ontological case study. I mean, what you have here is the archetypal documentation of how a civilization, an entire closed system, moves toward total collapse.
And it collapses specifically because of a failure in its moral infrastructure.
It's moral and intellectual infrastructure, yeah. To guide us, we're drawing on concepts from two key analytical texts you mentioned. One is Tending the Garden, which really helps us diagnose the mechanisms of fracture.
How things break.
And the other is Cathedral Bells, which helps us identify the immutable structures you need to survive when everything else is, disintegrating.
So the promise of this deep dive is that this whole system didn't fall by accident. It fell because of what our sources are calling subjective morality, hitting terminal velocity.
Precisely. When a society decides to cut itself off from the source of objective truth, it becomes a closed system. And just based on the physics of reality, that inevitably leads to entropy, to decay.
And that's where the flood comes in. The sources frame it as this incredibly harsh but necessary intervention.
It is. The flood isn't just a punishment. You have to see it as a necessary, if catastrophic, pruning. The garden had become completely choked by rot and corrupted seeds.
So the ark is the answer to that.
The ark is the revealed architecture. It's the structure that's given on the outside, and it's designed with one purpose: to hold moral and ontological coherence against cosmic chaos.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack that first sequence, Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. This is often the most confusing part for people, but it's where the first cracks in the system really appear.
It is.
The text reads, "And it came to pass that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all that they chose."
What's so fascinating is that the collapse doesn't begin with, a murder or a war. It starts with a bad marriage decision.
It seems almost small in comparison.
It does. But our framework, especially drawing from Tending the Garden, it starts with this premise that reality itself is built on distinctions.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning that for there to be order, things have to be separated according to their kind. It's the same logic as Genesis 1. You separate light from darkness, you separate the waters from the waters, land from sea.
So these aren't just arbitrary rules.
Not at all. They're the foundational physics of coherence. So when the sons of God, and you can interpret them as angelic beings or a specific set-apart human lineage, the principle holds.
Right.
When they deliberately cross that ontological or moral boundary to merge with the daughters of men, they are violating creation's fundamental code.
They're initiating what you're calling a catastrophic archetypal collapse.
That's the term. Archetypes are the moral blueprints of the cosmos. They define proper roles, behaviors, boundaries. And when you break them, it doesn't just feel wrong, it actively dismantles the structural integrity of the cosmos.
It's like you're taking the blueprints for a skyscraper and a canoe and just mashing them together.
Exactly. The resulting structure, if it even stands, is going to be fundamentally unsound.
That makes the act so much more profound than just lust. It's a tear in the fabric of reality.
Right.
How did this become normal? How did this kind of corruption spread so wide that it defined an entire civilization?
Okay, so this brings us to the mechanics of distortion. The term for it is valence hijacking.
Valence hijacking. Break that down for us.
So valence, in this context, is the intrinsic weight or glory or authority that belongs to something true or sacred.
And the hijacking is, what, borrowing that authority for something that isn't true?
Precisely. The sons of God, whoever they were, they had an inherent valence that was associated with a higher, set-apart realm. They had status,
Okay.
and they took that authority, that power, and they brought it down and used it for basically sexual gratification and power consolidation. They hijacked the institution of marriage for their own ends.
They're lending a kind of divine seal of approval to a debased action.
Yes. They're using their higher status to legitimize a boundary-breaking act. To give us a modern analogy, Think about trust in a financial system.
Okay.
Money only has valence value because we trust the institution that issues it, right? Valence hijacking is like creating a perfect counterfeit currency. You borrow all the aesthetics, the trust, the feel of the real thing.
But you use it to service something destructive.
Exactly. In Genesis 6, marriage held the valence of proper formation. They counterfeited it to satisfy their unrestrained desires.
And the text is so specific about their criteria for choosing. It says they chose because the women were fair.
And that's the pivot point. The focus on fairness, on aesthetic judgment, on subjective appeal over any kind of objective duty or ontological ought. They threw out the real reference point of kind, and they replaced it with what looks good to me.
Which leads to that really chilling phrase, all that they chose.
That phrase carries the entire philosophical weight of the breakdown.
How so?
It is the absolute hallmark of subjective morality. If your only limit is your personal preference and your power to take it and not some objective transcendent truth, the result is chaos. It's just drift.
Freedom without guardrails isn't freedom, it's just dissipation.
Right, and the system endorsed this. It said power defines what is right, which leads directly and inevitably to the violence that comes later in the chapter.
And the physical result of this union, this systemic failure, is the Nephilim. Genesis 6.4 says, "The Nephilim were in the earth. The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown."
The Nephilim are the embodied result of this failure. They are, quite literally, malformation. Tending the Garden has this principle. Formation is inevitable.
Everything is being shaped by something.
Always. But if that shaping happens outside the architect's design, the result is, well, a weed. Something that consumes the resources of the garden, but offers no coherence in return.
But the text calls them Gibborim, mighty men, and Anshai Hashem, men of renown. I mean, from the culture's perspective, these guys were heroes. They were celebrities.
And that's exactly why they were so dangerous. They were contaminated symbols.
What do you mean by that?
They represented power without ought.
Okay.
They were strong. They were famous precisely because they rejected all the boundaries. They were living proof that you could be a cultural hero while actively tearing down the cosmic order.
So they redefined good as dominant.
And that legitimized the violence and boundary breaking for everyone else. This is how the breakdown becomes systemic. It gets embedded in the culture through what our sources call the modalities of praxial formation.
Okay, let's use that framework. The four modalities, story, game, instruction, philosophy. How did the collapse play out through them?
Right. It wasn't just about a few bad choices. The culture itself was a training ground for destruction. Let's start with story.
The narrative of the age.
The corrupt story modality. The culture's foundational narrative glorified the Nephilim. The stories you heard taught you that strength, dominance, and breaking boundaries were virtues. The men of renown took whatever women they wanted, and the story the culture told about that was, this is success.
So the moral imagination was being trained to reward force.
Exactly. And that story then dictates the rules of engagement, which is the game.
Okay, so the predatory game modality.
The Nephilim basically controlled the game, the rules of social, political, economic interaction. The objective was acquisition. The strategy was dominance. And the feedback...
social reward. Fame. Renown.
Exactly. If the game rewards being a predator, then rational players have no choice but to become predators to survive or succeed.
Which makes the resulting philosophy pretty self-evident.
It does. The corrupted story reinforced the predatory game, which led to the toxic philosophy of might makes right. And this destroyed what should be praxial symbiosis, where all four should work together to reinforce truth. Instead, it locked the system into a self-destructive feedback loop.
Moral failure wasn't the bug, it was the feature.
It was the structural requirement for success in that system.
Wow. Okay, so if that first section was the diagnosis of the external collapse, the next part feels like the internal autopsy. Genesis 6.5 delivers this just harrowing verdict.
It really does.
And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually.
That phrase is the terminal diagnosis. And to really get it, we have to focus on the Hebrew word yetzer. It's translated as imagination or thoughts, but its root meaning is about formation or shaping. It's the engine of the will.
So the problem isn't just that they're committing evil acts, it's that the internal factory that produces any thought has been compromised. The engine only runs on corrupt fuel.
That's it, exactly. The internal compass, that innate moral sense, it hasn't just been ignored, it's been completely seized and recalibrated. They aren't choosing evil after a debate in their head. Their imagination, the core of their mental shaping mechanism, can only produce evil concepts.
They've been so colonized by the corrupt story that they can't even conceive of a good outside their own desires.
It's a complete philosophical dead end. You can't solve a problem if you can no longer even imagine what a solution looks like.
This is what the source calls the death of philosophy.
It is. True philosophy seeks the logos, the objective truth that governs us. But when the yet serves only evil, the mind rejects that external standard. It substitutes the logos for the ego. The mind's only job becomes rationalizing its own impulses.
And the text adds this temporal aspect that's so important. It wasn't just occasional. It was only evil continually, kol hayom, all the day.
Yes, and that reveals the terrifying power of formation through repetition. The pre-flood society didn't offer any safe harbors of moral neutrality. It was a relentless, total 247 reinforcement of corrupt signals.
A completely immersive environment of corruption. I'm remembering that line from the source material. Your walls are forming you. Your feed is forming you.
That's the idea. The instruction of the age was violence and self-sovereignty. The cultural atmosphere was toxic because every symbol, every hero of the Nephilim reinforced the two primary lies. Structure is optional and desire is sovereign.
It sounds totally inescapable.
And that's what creates a closed system of the soul. The conscience, which should be the receiver for external truth, gets buried under what the sources call scar tissue from sin. It just gets calloused over.
And once that happens, the system is impermeable. It can't receive any outside help.
Intervention from within becomes thermodynamically impossible.
Which brings us back to subjective morality. The modern assumption is that if everyone has their own truth, it leads to tolerance. But Genesis 6 seems to argue the exact opposite.
It's the ultimate refutation of that idea. Subjective morality is entropy in action. If there are no objective oughts, no shared standards, then there's no better. There's only chaotic motion.
And when everyone's truth is equally valid, how do you settle arguments?
By force. That's the only thing left. When the sound of coherent subjective truth is lost, the only arbiter is physical power. The system just devolves into a war of all against all.
And that directly explains why the text says the earth was filled with violence.
Violence is the inevitable thermodynamic output of that closed, decaying system. When words and boundaries fail, only fists remain. The collapse didn't happen because of the violence. The violence happened because of the underlying philosophical collapse.
So now we come to the emotional crisis point of the chapter, Genesis 6.6. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. This is a huge stumbling block for a lot of people. If God is perfect, how can he repent?
Right. It seems to imply a change of mind or some kind of surprise.
Yeah.
And this is where we have to bring in the cathedral bells triune grammar of reality to understand it.
The source, form, and bridge.
Exactly. The grief described here isn't, a human emotion projected onto God. It's an ontological crisis, the relationship between the creator and the creation.
Okay, let's use the symbols to make it clear. The source, the bullet point.
The source is God, the uncreated origin of all good, all coherence.
The form, the asterisk,
is humanity, created as the imago Dei, meant to be the perfect reflection of the source.
And the bridge, the square.
That's the relational connection, the spirit that strives with man that connects the two.
So where did the breakdown happen within that grammar?
The form became so distorted, the wickedness was great, that the mirror shattered. The creator looks at his creation and sees only a grotesque caricature of his intent.
So the pain, the grief, is the pain of that broken connection.
Yes. The bridge, square, which was meant to be a conduit of life and relationship, it became a conduit of sorrow because the form had so aggressively rejected the source. The form made itself incompatible with its own origin.
And that incompatibility necessitates the decision in the next verse. I will destroy man whom I have created.
It has to be seen as an act of tending, not just retribution. Tending the garden makes this distinction between a sentimental gardener and a faithful gardener.
The sentimental gardener avoids pain.
Right. He hates cutting, so he lets the rot spread. But the faithful gardener, who is seeking truth, not comfort, he names the rot for what it is, and he surgically removes it to save the rest of the orchard.
So destruction as a necessary act of preservation.
The flood is pruning on a planetary scale. God first names the imagination evil. That clarity is the prerequisite for the cut. If you let the wildflowers, the corruption, the Nephilim culture choke the soil forever, the potential for any good life is lost.
This brings us back to the physics of closed systems. Why couldn't they just change course on their own?
Because of that core law. Entropy always wins in a closed system. The pre-flood world had explicitly cut itself off. My spirit shall not strive with man forever.
They sealed this system.
They did. And cut off from the source, the system could only decay. It could only move toward violence, which is the heat death of a moral universe.
And a closed system cannot generate the energy to save itself.
It cannot.
Yeah.
It requires an intervention from outside. The flood is that intervention. It's a decreation, a system reboot, to allow for a new open system centered on Noah to begin. The sources are really stark on this point. The destruction is reality's immune response.
Coherence can't sustain incoherence forever.
It can't. The bell of truth eventually rings, and it shatters the falsehood that you can build a world without boundaries.
And the entire narrative pivots on this one tiny word in verse 8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That but stops the entire trajectory of decay.
It's the introduction of external energy. In our thermodynamic model, grace is the energy input that arrests entropy. Noah wasn't saved because he was intrinsically better or more powerful than everyone else, no. He was saved because he was permeable to God. He chose alignment. The bridge between himself, the form, and the source was still intact. He was still receiving instruction.
It wasn't about his value to the collapsing system. It was his posture of receptivity.
Precisely. Cathedral Bells has this beautiful paradox. You are not necessary, but you can be aligned. Noah's value was his alignment, a posture the rest of his culture had completely abandoned.
Let's break down that alignment profile, because verse 9 gives him a very specific three-part CV. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. If we want to build moral infrastructure, we need to understand what these mean structurally.
They form the complete infrastructure needed to survive a collapse. It's a perfect contrast to the subjective morality outside.
Okay, let's start with righteous man, or a tzaddik. What does that mean here?
It means adherence to the objective oughts. In a culture where the game rewarded taking whatever you chose, Noah operated by an invisible, universal, non-negotiable standard of justice. He understood that right and wrong were objective, not dependent on cultural trends or personal power.
He was playing by a different rulebook.
A completely different one.
Yeah.
Then you have perfect in his generations, tamim.
Which means whole or sound, right?
All sound, blemish-free.
Yeah.
And in the context of the archetypal collapse, the hybridization that was corrupting the species, this is vital. Noah maintained structural integrity. He avoided symbolic contamination.
He kept the form.
He did. He was structurally sound, where the Nephilim were structurally malformed, and that integrity was essential for him to be the seed of a new humanity.
And finally, the active part, walked with God.
This is the daily practice of praxial symbiosis. While everyone else was being formed by the corrupt story of renown, Noah was being formed by the active instruction and presence of the gardener. He was consistently prioritizing input from the source over his own internal imagination, his yetzer.
That walking is what made him an open system.
It's what kept the channel open to receive the life-saving instructions.
And this required a massive intellectual rejection of everything he could see.
He had to perform what Cathedral Bells calls the death of presupposition. The presuppositions of his age were, violence is normal, the world will go on like this forever, our desires are our only guide. He had to see those axioms and reject them.
He had to bet on an invisible order over the visible chaos.
Absolutely. He presupposed the logos, that God was real, that boundaries mattered, and that judgment was not just possible but imminent. That's discernment. It's surrendering to the shape of reality as revealed by the architect, even when that shape is invisible to the crowd.
And so we get this dramatic shift. We move from diagnosis to the actual structure. God says, make thee an ark of gopher wood. This is the moment the solution is handed down.
This is where the diagnostic of tending the garden meets the architectural plans of Cathedral Bells. The ark isn't just a boat. It is the physical, tangible answer to the question, what holds?
And the instructions are incredibly precise. 300 cubits by 50 by 30. This is not a human invention.
It is entirely revealed instruction. The fact that the dimensions are so detailed emphasizes a crucial point. In an age of collapse, your own intuition is not enough. Our internal compasses are too skewed by the culture to find our own way out.
Survival means submitting to the architect's blueprint.
Yes, the ark is both the blueprint and the bell. It's a structure designed according to the physics of the coming storm. Noah's job wasn't to improve it, but to align with it.
Let's talk about the materials. Gopher wood, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch.
The gopher wood represents the materiality of truth. Moral infrastructure can't be built on, good vibes or sentiment. It needs substance. It needs rigor.
And the pitch, that's the sealant.
Yes, but it's also a mandate for symbolic clarity and boundary maintenance. The pitch is the absolute non-negotiable barrier between the inside order and life and the outside chaos and death.
And sealing it within and without means total integrity.
It means you can't be publicly pious but privately let the floodwaters in. The pitch is the refusal to let the symbolic contamination of the age dilute the pure form of the remnant inside. Integrity is a prerequisite for survival.
Okay, what about the design, the window and the door? They seem critical.
They define the necessary orientation and the necessary exclusivity of the rescue vehicle.
The window, the sohar, is placed high up, right?
Yes, and that high placement mandates an orientation upward. Think about it. When the flood comes and all your earthly reference points are gone, looking out horizontally only gives you trauma. You see wreckage, death, chaos.
So the high window forces your gaze upward.
It forces the remnant to fix their gaze on the source, on the one who transcends the chaos, not on the things that are breaking.
And the door, just one entrance.
That single door speaks to architectural exclusivity. As Cathedral Bell says, truth is not persuasive, it is clear. When you're facing ontological collapse, there aren't multiple valid structures for survival. There is one that holds. It's an architectural necessity, not an arbitrary rule.
And the three stories, does that structure have a symbolic meaning too?
It's both functional and deeply symbolic. The arc itself is a floating microcosmos of coherence, and its three levels physically manifest that recursive triune grammar.
Walk us through that map one more time.
The lower foundation represents the source. It's the stability, the ballast. The second structure is the form. That's the ordered living space, where life is preserved after their kind. And the third connection, near the window, is the bridge, connecting them to the sky, to the spirit. The whole vessel is a teaching mechanism.
We move from the blueprint to the covenant. God says, I, even I, do bring a flood, but with thee will I establish my covenant. The promise is right next to the judgment.
And that placement is vital. It answers the question, how can what is broken repair itself? The answer is, it can't, hence the judgment. The next question is, so how does anything survive? The answer is, the covenant.
So the covenant is the non-physical structure holding the physical one together.
That's a great way to put it. The covenant is the bridge that carries life over the waters of death, guaranteed by the source. It's the moral infrastructure that undergirds the physical arc. It's the promise that coherence is stronger than collapse.
Then there's Noah's actual job, gathering all the life. The text just says, the animals shall come unto thee.
And this is the ultimate act of tending the garden in a world committed to death. But the principle is key. Tending is not control. Noah doesn't use force or predation, which was the game of the Nephilim.
He just creates a center of stability, and reality organizes around it.
When the tender Noah is fully aligned with the source, reality responds. His obedience creates a magnetic center of order, a homing beacon that draws the elements of life to the one stable point left in a collapsing world.
And inside the ark, the normal rules of the wild, the predatory game, they must be suspended.
It becomes a monastic reality. Inside, they have to coexist by instruction and stewardship, not by the violence of the outside world. It's a re-education. It forces the new humanity to learn to live by grace, not by the dominance that defined the old world.
And the chapter ends with this simple, powerful statement. Verse 22, thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he.
That sentence is the sound of coherence. It's the final perfect note ringing out against the total dissonance of the dying age.
It's the direct contrast to the world outside.
A world defined by willfulness doing all that they chose. Noah is defined by willingness doing what was commanded.
He didn't innovate on the design, he aligned himself to it.
And in doing so, he proved that formation into the image of God is possible, even in total cultural collapse. You just have to submit to the revealed structure.
So this deep dive gives us so much more than a story. It's a diagnostic tool for how systems decay. We've mapped the fracture, a civilization abandoning objective oughts for subjective imagination, leading straight to violence and collapse.
And we also have the blueprint of rescue. It's a clear warning. Closed systems decay. The physical floodwaters prove a metaphysical truth. The object, which is reality and its laws, will always eventually overwhelm the subject's arbitrary will.
So as the cathedral bells are ringing in our own time, what's the ultimate takeaway for someone listening trying to build coherence today?
The task isn't to stop the macro storm. That's outside our control. The immediate actionable task is to build the ark in your own life, to consciously construct your own personal moral infrastructure, through deliberate alignment.
Okay, so give us the final steps, the synthesis of Genesis 6 for today.
4 steps. First, submit to the blueprint. Choose instruction over your own imagination. Adhere to the revealed structure. Don't invent your own based on what feels good.
Okay.
Second, pitch the vessel. Seal your soul against symbolic contamination. Total integrity within and without. Don't let the chaos outside define the order inside.
Third.
Tend the remnant. Gather and protect the seeds of truth in life that you're responsible for. Resist playing the predatory game of the culture.
And last.
And fourth, walk with the source. Maintain that daily praxial symbiosis, that connection, so you can still hear the sound of coherence when everything else is just noise.
It demands a fundamental commitment to something outside of ourselves.
It does. Noah's life asks the central question of reality. What holds? And the answer, verified by the survival of humanity, is simple. The structure holds.
An incredibly powerful analysis of a chapter we often simplify. Thank you for guiding us through this.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this gives you something rigorous to mull over as you build your own moral infrastructure. We'll see you next time.